This is Mona Tanja, President of NCSM, and welcome to Learning with Leaders, the Bold Mathematics Leadership Series. Join me as I sit down and have conversations with emerging and established leaders exploring equity in action. You will hear from bold mathematics leaders as they share their experiences and actions and what they have learned from them. We think these next few minutes will help you consider the bold actions that you can take to focus on equity and support those that you serve. Grab a warm cup of coffee and a journal as we learn together on our mathematics leadership journey. Hello, I'm Mona Tanja, and welcome to the NCSM podcast, Learning with Leaders. John Sangiovanni and I are the co-hosts for the Bold Mathematics Leadership Series. And to finish up this series, we've invited speakers to sit down with us and discuss what equity means to them and share with us their experiences and stories of leadership actions that support our journey as math leaders. Today, we have with us Sunil Singh. Sunil Singh is a longtime educator, author, and storyteller. His current passion is expanding the lens of anti-racist math education and illuminating the rich global narratives found in math history. He is a math program advisor at Amplify and content creator at Mathagon. As well, he is the president of the board of directors of the nonprofit organization called the Human Restoration Project. He is also the author of Pie of Life, The Hidden Happiness of Mathematics, Math Recess, Playful Learning in the Age of Disruption, and a soon-to-be-released book called Chasing Rabbits, A Curious Guide to a Lifetime of Mathematical Wellness. And he is one of our spotlight speakers at the upcoming 53rd Annual Conference in Atlanta in September. So welcome, Sunil. We are so glad to have you today.
I am so glad to see you. I'm so glad to see John. I mean, it's been a while since we've seen each other in person, but just seeing familiar faces, even through this sort of interface, is really good on a nice sort of summer evening here in Toronto. So yes, I'm excited to look forward. This is going to be a fast 20, 25 minutes, I think.
Absolutely. So we've been starting off each of these podcasts by asking our speakers, what does equity mean to you? So we'll start with that question.
Well, I love the fact you pose it individually to people because, we're going to get unique answers based on their own experiences. And for me, and this is literally, it's not even an abstract metaphorical way, equity is a journey. And I mean that literally because 11 years ago this summer, I actually gave my first workshop ever as a teacher, which was called Searching for Equity.
Wow.
And it was at at a local university. It was my first workshop ever. It's a big one to start. And that's why title is Searching for Equity, because I don't know anything just yet. I am learning. And it was going into math history and, where does math come from? Like, where does it come from? Like, who founded mathematics beyond the people that I read about, the people that you read about? 11 years later, I think I would still do that same workshop because I'm still searching for it. And I think it's important the way that you're phrasing the question, because to get an equitable definition of equity, you need to allow all the different ideas to sort of come together. And they could be even something like, whether it's closing the achievement gap, that's something also important there. But for me, even if you say giving, let's say, all kids equal access to high level instruction, that doesn't necessarily mean they're all that instruction is going to percolate down to their experience. Mm-hmm. So for me, equity really means starting with the student and putting everything through the student. So if I was to use that metaphor, equity is a journey, maybe as I'm driving or whatever, I have to check the rearview mirror. Are the kids still with me? Like, where am I going? Are the students still with me? Am I still doing stuff in their best interest? Am I addressing things like, the math trauma that they assume they're going to have? And, social emotional learning and all that kind of, and anti-racist, like all the stuff which has come up in the last, 18 months or so. And that's why I think just keeping it open and let's get all the different definitions in, and maybe that becomes our starting point in 2021.
Yeah, I love that answer. And I love the fact that you picked up on this notion of there's individual perspectives to equity and on that question. Which brings me to a question I have for you, and that is, you talked about learning and the value of learning from one another, the individuality, and the notion of many ideas coming together, which made me think about our upcoming conference. And we're excited to have you as a major speaker for NCSM's 53rd annual conference. What is something about the conference that you look forward to?
Well, as we sort of talked before we hit record, but I think it's okay to even mention that, because it needs to be said twice, is just to see people again and to see kindred spirits again, to feel like that whatever kind of collective mission that we're on, that we're still sort of, sculpting, is being done, that we're not isolated. And this is a very important sort of emotional, psychological boost to come to a conference. And yes, you've got all these amazing speakers, a curated program, but as we know, it's more than just the workshops. It's the hallway conversations. It's even the conversations that happen even in the bathroom or at breakfast. They're always kind of there. And then it's that collective sum that you take back home to your districts, and that whole sort of invigoration, which you can only get from those in-person conferences. That's what makes us human. That's why I am on this board of directors of the Human Restoration Project. We're trying to restore the humanness, which has been atrophying the last 18 months.
Yeah, and that is so well said. I just want to say it again for the listener. We need to re-find our tribes and get back together and have those social events. And going to sessions is a learning opportunity, but so is that conversation in the hallway. And just I like you miss seeing our math friends.
You said it so well. 2 words, well, 3 words: re-find our tribes. Right?
I love that.
Our tribes, we have to, it's like a search party, Okay, everyone meet in Atlanta, okay? Can we do that? It almost feels like a pop-up event, although it's not, but we're doing anything we can to sort of, get back in terms of, why do we do this? Why do we love this? All the amazing collective work that all of us do together. It only makes sense when we're doing it together.
Yeah, I would definitely add the connection piece. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I like going to conferences, especially the NCTM and NCSM events, because I feel so connected to the stories that are being told, because you're hearing from your peers. And I, as a math leader, that was where I got a lot of affirmation, because sometimes you're on an island in your district. You're the only person who's leading mathematics in your district. And so the affirmations, the confirmations that where you're going is the right work, or that you're using the right resources to influence those you serve, and or that you're just influencing change. So that the connectedness is so important. Very important.
The connectedness, and the other C word, which I think NCSM has used in some conference themes, or is those courageous conversations, which I think can only have when you feel safety of someone's body language, or in person. I'm not saying you have them like this, but there's that extra sort of dimension, texture, that extra couple minutes you spend with them after a workshop or presentation. You're getting to know them a little bit better through the lens of the presentation, and maybe there's a discussion that you wouldn't have had otherwise because of that sort of pop-up intimacy, that moment just as you're exiting the doors of wherever you're presenting, and they're going one way, you're going another way. Yeah, let's maybe have coffee. Those interstitial kind of connecting things to workshops is what's been missing. And with them, they don't, it loses some color and texture. And so that's why, coming to Atlanta, I'm sure in terms of all the safety regulations, all that, I am confident. I know a lot of my colleagues are very confident, and we feel that this time and moment is really important to make sure that, if especially things are safe and the guidelines have been met, that we owe it to each other and to ourselves to be there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I know Mona has another question for you. And before she says it though, she and I worked together so long virtually. And the first time we saw each other in person, she said, "You're so much shorter in person."
I did.
So those are the only types of things you get to hear when you're in the same room together. And so,
I thought it
I
was
miss that kind of experience when we are at conferences. But sorry, Mona, you had a question that I imagine was much deeper than that. So
Oh,
please go on.
I do. Yeah, so I'm excited about your session. The title is Broadening the Lens of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion in Our Math Content and Pedagogy Through History and Storytelling. So I'm going to be in your session, but give us a sneak peek or a little preview of what we would take away from your session.
So I actually want to start with the title of my session backwards, because
Okay.
if you look at the last two words, history, storytelling, and then sort of, unpack it backwards, there's a quote that I use. I've used it in every single presentation keynote that I've done the last 18 months. And it's a quote from the Harvard Business Review. So it gives it some authority, but I also like it because it's got like this sort of economy of words. It's very simple. It says, to involve people at the deepest level, you need stories. So what I like about that quote is no one's going to refute it. No one's going to go, yeah, I think there's a deeper way to reach people. So right away, you've got everyone like on board with this sort of pretty, above the shoulders, high level kind of idea, the connecting at a deep level with stories. But then what I'm also going to say right after is, don't we all want from our students a deep understanding, for ourselves too, by the way, don't we all want a deep understanding of mathematics? We always say that. So if stories are the deepest way to connect with people and we want deep understanding of mathematics, I don't think that's a bridge too far to cross. And that's what the session is really about, is to first have this sort of agreement about the power of stories. And that starts with our own stories. And I have this image of these 3 rings, Borromean rings, that of course you pull one ring out, the other 2 rings fall apart. So the 3 rings are titled The Story of Mathematics, The Story of You as an Educator, and The Story of Your Students. All 3 are important. You take one out, it loses its meaning. And the one that we kind of sometimes maybe miss, we always talk about, okay, let's get the story of our students, is what's the story of our own journey in mathematics, especially elementary teachers and educators. I know a couple of math leaders up here in my own province, math leaders who have personal math trauma that they're still coming to grips with because they suffer from the imposter syndrome. They can't believe that I don't deserve this, or I shouldn't be here because I did this. So that is also part of the storytelling. What you're going to do is the power. What do stories do? They empower us to tell our journey. They also tell the thematic development of mathematics. And I forgot to answer this in the opening question, the equity question, but I'm going to answer it here because it's so germane. The best way I kind of describe the difference between equality and equity is if you had 4 loaves of bread and 5 people, and you asked how much bread does everybody get? So you have 4 loaves of people, 4 and 5 people, and everyone's going to go 4/5, which is correct. But we never think about what the distribution of that bread's going to be, because what it's going to look like is that 4 to 5 people got almost entire loaves, and the 5th person got those bottom shards.
Yeah, that's no fun.
The equal amount of bread, but it wasn't equitable.
Right.
And the equitable way to do this would be with Egyptian fractions, to give everybody a half, a quarter, and 1/20th. And if you add them up, you get 4/5. So even that whole idea of Egyptian fractions, is there that is itself an idea of equity in terms of unit fractions. So I just have found, and this is again going back to it's a journey, and I'm still on this journey. And everything I found out math history, it has a cross section with the social economic situation of the times, sometimes the art, literature. It creates a humanness. And so I tell some of the math stories when in my session, I'll be doing that, What I'm going to do then afterward is I'm going to remove the human element. And I'm going to say, how would you feel if I presented the exact same math concept without the humans involved, without the cultures, without those references, just the math? Let's compare the two. Which one is going to sit better with you? Or more importantly, which one do you think is going to sit better with your students? If going back to the Harvard Business Review quote, the deepest way to reach people is through stories.
That's awesome.
I can't wait to go to your session. I'll just leave it at that. I'll leave it at that. I mean, some of the things you're talking about makes me think about my role as a teacher, and that I have a math story myself, and that influences the things that happen in my classroom potentially. And I think the other thing, though, my story isn't complete, and I think that that's really something that's powerful and sticks
That's
with
very
me.
powerful.
I want to ask you a question about story, math history, and storytelling.
Yeah.
What is something about math history or storytelling that you think would surprise the average math, I don't know, student, teacher, or math leader for that matter?
Well, the one that there's a couple that I reference quite a bit, but the one which really I think deserves attention, especially if you do it at a workshop, because everyone's, people got their laptops open. I'll say, everyone look at your laptop, and I'll say locate 0. And 0 occurs after 9. And then my question to you is, why is that? Because isn't 0 supposed to come before 1? So I let that sort of just ruminate for a while, like, why was it put there? Well, it was put there because it's like it's only was delegated to be a placeholder. Now that's its only value that we have given it, because we're going to put it arbitrarily after 9, because, if it would put a 1, it would have been 10. So 0 doesn't have that sort of power. Now, I have a good friend, kindred spirit in Australia, named Jonathan Crabtree, who has spent 32 years of his life investigating what happened to 0. And I mean by that is that 0 is supposed to be the lowest number, just like you can't have less than 0 energy or matter in the universe. And 0 is supposed to be the lowest number, and positive and negatives, like, you would never say an electron with a charge of -1 and a proton a charge of +1. You would never say the electron is less than the proton, because it's all about magnitudes, and it's about yin and yang. And that information got lost as it was coming up the Silk Road, and eventually landed in a place called the House of Wisdom. And even though we have these amazing Arabic Islamic scholars doing amazing work in algebra, Al-Khwarizmi, Omar Khayyam, they just maybe didn't read the chapter on 0 being the lowest number. And if you look at even in our own education system, we do a question like 2 subtract 1, maybe in kindergarten, because kids can hold up 2 fingers, pull down 1, but we're not going to do 1 subtract 2 for 5-6 years. So we create a pathological idea that negative numbers are something weird with them. And when they're separated, divorced from that sort of yin yang, then we get the anxiety with negative numbers. And what about a kid who lives in the northern part of the US or Minnesota? We have negative temperatures.
I know.
What's the question going to be to their parents, going, what does -5 mean? So for me, that is a very surprising thing, that 0 should have been the lowest number. The number line should have actually been a vertex. So the 0 is at the vertex, and the positive negatives sort of flesh out like vectors from that. And you can see the symmetry. Again, if you walk 5 miles west and 2 miles east, and you superimpose on a number line, all of a sudden you've got the number -5 and +2. And are you going to say the person who walked 5 miles west walked less? No, you're going to create confusion. And for me, just going back, this is like I should have bought a punctuation mark for this answer. But I would rather give a kid in senior kindergarten or grade 1 to think about 1 subtract 2. Let them think about it for a week, these kids. And I bet you they'd come back in their own language, how it makes sense to them. That if there's, I've got 1 muffin and 2 people, what kind of language can I use that makes sense? And some of the most powerful mathematical ideas can be just done with single digits, right? So unfortunately, we sort of park the negative numbers 5-6 years later. And, ironically, they could have been done earlier, could have had a nice symmetry with zero, could have accessed math history with Aryabhata, Brahmagupta, his book, Brahmas. Again, all these things are extricated and it's just negative numbers, but where they come from. And math anxiety, math trauma, math boredom, we are surprised when it occurs because circling back, there's no story to it. There's no storyboard.
When I
So
went,
speaking,
oh, go ahead, Don.
no, so I mean, I want to say so many things and I just won't. But you're right. I work with young students all the time. They understand the idea or the notion of negative numbers and owing people money or things of that nature, right? But just for me, the power of story, like you just did such a wonderful job of talking about zero. I can't wait for our listeners to hear the podcast, and my encouragement will be to rewind it 5 minutes and just listen to that twice. And I look forward to that myself.
Try it.
And
I
all
was
sincerity.
like mentally drawing it as you were talking. I was like, wow.
Right, but talking about so many other connections there, and again, context and connections and understanding. So, I'm sorry, Moni, I interrupted you.
Oh no, I was going to tell a little story, but I know that you guys have probably seen this. So I traveled to Europe for my first time, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I went to Paris with my mom and my daughters, and my first experience in an elevator, they actually have negative numbers on the elevator. So when you're at zero, you're the first floor, that's zero. And then the floors go up and the floors go down. And I took a picture and I posted it on social media. And I was like, if America did this, we would all understand positive and negative numbers. And somebody said, oh, I see this every time somebody goes to Europe for math teachers, because it's true. I mean, we have a society that for some reason they don't like to do the negative numbers where that's what's happening. So anyway,
well, it's been part of the history too. Like if you follow in terms of how negative numbers have been treated by mathematicians, like it's like oh, that's voodoo, or they don't exist. We're not going to go below zero.
Right.
So we've actually passed on that anxiety pedagogically.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, we've denied access.
Yeah.
We've denied access. We've created artificial barriers.
There you go. Perfect.
We've done
Thank
so
you,
many things that
I love
undermine.
Very powerful.
Success.
Denied access. That's exactly it. And kids don't start mathematics in grade 5 or 6. They start mathematics again, in kindergarten.
Or sooner.
Age
right?
2.
They know 2 cookies versus 1, but I'm sorry.
One of the things that we do, again, going back to stories, is we don't listen to their stories, even if they're misconceptions about mathematics. We just want the slate clean, just using that slate imagery, because Little House on the Prairie is my favorite show of all time. Had to get that in there. Okay.
All right. I'm sorry, but go on.
We know why we have a kid.
I watch all the other shows. But there's something about it is aged very well. Okay. That show is aged very well, but we'll talk about it in Atlanta. But it's just the fact that that kids would be energized by, they could talk in narrative speak, right? I remember I went in and I went to my daughter's class when she was in grade 3, and I held up a tetrahedron, and I asked the kids, okay, I pointed to one of the corners, and I was actually hoping they would say corner, but they said vertex. And I go, that's fancy-smancy. Can I call it a corner? Because I think it's important to call it a corner first and then go, you know what? We got another term for that, and use their kind of wink, wink, kind of, kids speak kind of stuff. It's vertex, right? Sometimes some of the terminology, we just pack it on. They start to lose their intuition for it. And I think we all have this intuition for mathematics. We have this romance period for learning, which occurs somewhere in the window of K to 3. And I think it was Dewey or Alfred North Whitehead said, if we don't attend to this romance period, then it's going to be all for naught.
Yeah.
So remember our romance period of learning.
Well, no, and when you think about young students as well, they conceptualize what a corner is. They've felt those, they've touched those, they've interacted with those, right? They probably haven't come across too many vertices. The point is that making that connection first is so much more powerful.
It feels like that. Yeah, okay, I want to be involved in something called mathematics, and Again, mathematics should be a mirror for students, like literally a mirror, that who I am is in mathematics. It should be a place of refuge, like in terms of, as opposed to causing anxiety. Like this is what mathematics can do. If it couldn't do this, if it was like, there's some math people and there's some not math people, we're not even having this conversation. I don't know, maybe I've taken a different profession or something, but because I so passionately, and I think we all do, believe that everyone is entitled to a rich mathematical experience, doesn't mean it's going to be easy. And I talk about it in my book. It's the messy middle. Brené Brown's got a quote that in the middle is where it's messy. It's always also where the magic is. Guess what? Same thing in mathematics.
Yep.
All the magic is in that messy middle. That's where all the conversations come from.
That's exactly right. I was just literally saying that today, is that for whatever reason, somewhere along the line, students learn that math is about an answer at the end, where it's not about the answer. It's about all the stuff in the middle. That's where the magic happens. And stop having your students erase what they do and start over. Like you want, right? You want them, that's part of the story piece. That's the storyline. So I mean, I'll just tell you personally, like as a math educator, in the last 2 years, I've learned more about mathematics, looking at it through the lens of a storyline and not just looking at it as a problem, right? That like like you think about like unit planning and stuff. As a teacher, it was like, okay, I'm doing this unit and then I'm doing this unit and then I'm doing this unit. But I've learned that it's like there's so many connections. And so the quote from San Francisco Unified, that math is a web, not a ladder, that whole piece really sent home some ideas for me around thinking about mathematics through this lens of story. So I say this because it goes back to where you started, that equity is a journey. So is our own journey of learning how to be a storyteller through our content in those pieces. So my question for you then is, how can a math leader get started in this? Or what are things that they can do to grow, or advice you'd give them to tap into the history or the storytelling so that it would, I don't know, be more natural for them or something?
Well, and this is a question I get. I think we're in an idea-rich time. This idea of storytelling narrative has kind of, it's blossoming, it's blooming right now. And with any emergent idea, the resources will, catch up to it. But what I would suggest is the safest place to start with a story is, what's your story? Your story that you would tell kids. And when Jo Boaler wrote the foreword for my book, she actually titled her foreword for the book, "What is Your Story?" Because she saw this book as really as a one big story filled with a lot of smaller stories. So the first thing to do in terms of, okay, I would love to bring more math history and narrative in, that's great. And I would give you, and I'll share those resources and ideas. But the first thing I would do is to have a relatively unvarnished conversation about what your story is and tell it to students. Maybe you've never had an opportunity, or maybe you feel that, you want to not share that sort of like moment of where, I wasn't always the best math student, or I struggled. Well, that actually has a lot of currency now. Right? We've all struggled with mathematical ideas. In fact, I'll give it one better. I look forward to mathematics, which is going to cause me to struggle. That to me, again, it goes to the messy middle, right? I feel alive. I feel like I'm part of the thematic development of mathematics, because somebody was looking down and watched everyone do mathematics for the last 1,000 years. Most of it is about slow failure. That's the narrative. And that's the narrative I'm going to sign up for, that I've signed up for. And it would also disarm a lot of these teachers, especially elementary teachers, to go, you know what, my story is valuable? Absolutely. And it's very important you share all of it with your students, because then that gives them a safe place to do so as well. So I would say start with your own stories. and then maybe slowly encourage individual stories of students, in terms of, how they've felt about mathematics. And even if they say, I hate mathematics, or it makes me feel like this, get those conversations out, create a place of trust. That's so important, of course, in the whole teaching aspect. But in terms of resources, even if you're not a high school teacher, I would strongly recommend the book Crest of the Peacock, which is, I think now it's its third edition. It's like 500 pages, but it's really like, it's like Raiders of the Lost Ark in terms of all the lost knowledge from all the different cultures, races, civilizations, indigenous tribes, in terms of where mathematics, and I was gifted that book early on in my teaching career. So a lot of it is luck. And, it's like, okay, they're not teaching this. I mean, look how rich this is, right? So Crest of the Peacock, Mathagon, which is a free website, which I'm a content creator at. They have a beautiful math history timeline that shows, and they're constantly filling it up with all the mathematicians that you can see, especially women mathematicians of color, mathematicians from the last century, current mathematicians, so that students don't think that math is a dead idea. Like math research and stuff is still going on. There's about 600-700 unsolved problems in the world that nobody knows the answer to. So we always sort of think of math as a sterile thing, like it was maybe dropped by aliens in a test tube 100 years ago on a beach. It's got a rich history and it has a rich future. So, and the other resource, which I would mention, and these are free, available at amplified.com/math profile cards. We have 21 math profile history cards, which they just initiate conversation. They give a bio, what they did. So kids get to see that mathematics was done by people that look like me, right? And that my teacher is sharing it with me too. I'm not finding it by accident, by walking in the hallway in another teacher's class. That teacher cared enough to share this with me. But again, to me, it starts with what Joe said, what is your story? Start there.
That is incredibly powerful. It reminds me, so I heard you quote Brene Brown earlier. It's the vulnerability. Like when you tell your story, you're being vulnerable, which is just going to help build a community of learners, because we need to be risk takers. Like it's
the easiest thing to do. To be human, show your vulnerability, because once we start showing, it becomes very infectious, and you just want to be vulnerable everywhere.
It's awesome.
Can I just give a quick shout out to the timeline of mathematics on mathagon.org? That's one of the coolest things I've come across in so many years.
It's very empowering. It's very empowering.
And then having students write their own math timelines could be a really cool addition to that in the classroom. So I love it, and it's a great book.
That's awesome. I hadn't thought about that idea, John. That's a great idea.
That is a great idea.
That's a great idea.
I don't have many, so I hope that was recorded.
You saved it for the end, huh? Okay.
I did. Like I'm now dropping the mic.
Okay.
Dropped it at the very end.
Sure.
Take us away, Mona.
All right. Well, Sunil, thank you so much for joining this month's podcast. We just appreciate your time and your passion and energy for mathematics. And if you guys would like to continue this conversation, please join the Beyond the Conference in the fall, or any of our networking nights that are in the spring. And we really hope to see you in Atlanta. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Mona. Thank you, John.
We hope you have been inspired by this bold mathematics leadership conversation and will tune into our podcast series each month. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and a review. You can learn more about NCSM, Leadership in Mathematics Education, and our upcoming professional learning events on the NCSM website at mathedleadership.org. You can also follow NCSM on Twitter at mathedleaders using the hashtag NCSMBold. Thanks again.